Welcome to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus. Our guest in this edition is Ralph Goldsticker Jr., a U.S. Army Air Force veteran in the European theater of World War II. Goldsticker served in the 452nd Bomb Group and earned the rank of captain. Born in University City, Missouri in 1921, Ralph Goldsticker still remembers the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941.
On the day of Pearl Harbor attack, I was 20, and I was at a friend's house. We were planning a conclave for a fraternity. And about 1 o'clock, the news came over that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. And then we knew we were going to be war because we're building up to it with the Japanese envoys were here. We're talking peace. Well, it didn't happen, so we knew war was going to be inevitable then. When they attacked Pearl Harbor, that's an act of war, so I knew we were going to war.
Goldsticker remembers the emotions that swept over him as he heard the terrible news.
I guess shocked that they would do that and destroy our naval facilities at Pearl Harbor. It's unbelievable. They attacked the United States. What are we going to do now?
When he knew the war was coming, Ralph Goldsticker decided he wanted to be an officer, and the Army Air Corps provided him that opportunity.
Well, I wanted to be an officer, and I saw a recruiting poster that said within 6 months you can become an officer by being a pilot, a bombardier, a navigator. And I said my uncle was an officer, and came visiting. I was always impressed. So I wanted to be an officer too, so I joined the Aviation Cadet Corps so I could become an officer within hopefully 6 months, being a pilot or a bombardier or a navigator. I enlisted July 6, 1942 as aviation cadet. It was at Jefferson Barracks, and then we were sent to Nashville, which was a classification center. And there we took all kinds of tests to see whether we required skills to become a pilot, a bombardier, a navigator. They test us inside and out, mentally, physically, and I passed all three. And I said I wanted to be a pilot. So then they sent me to Maxwell Field, Alabama for pre-flight. Maxwell Field was an old established air base, so rather than 60 people in barracks, we had suites of 6. And we had 6 weeks of pre-flight. In pre-flight, we were in school from 8 in the morning till 5 at night, 6 days a week, taking numerous courses, physics, Code of Conduct of the Army, aircraft recognition, all kinds of regulations for 6 weeks. And then instead we went to DAR Aerotech in Albany, Georgia for pilot school. That was the beginning of being a pilot in a Stearman PT-17.
Despite his wishes to become a pilot, Goldsticker couldn't quite meet the standards. He then transferred to bombardier school.
After 10 hours of dual flight, I soloed for the first time. And I was going straight down the runway, beautiful landing. And at the last second, I thought the wind was coming from the left, so I hit the left rudder and ground rooped the plane and dug the wing into the ground. I can still see my instructor at the end of the runway throwing his parachute down. How could a student do that? But I did 3 more times. But after my 40-hour check, 20-hour check, I passed. 40-hour check, I failed. And the recheck, I failed. When the instructor cut the engine, you're supposed to go upwind. I went downwind. So after 46 hours and 2 minutes, I was washed out of pilot school. I did get the measles, and then I was in the hospital for a week. And then I went back to Nashville and said I wanted to be a bombardier. Went back to pre-flight again, this time at Ellington Field in Texas. And as a bombardier, you have 250 caliber machine guns in the nose. So I went to Laredo, Texas for 6 weeks for gunnery school. And then I went to Childress, Texas for 12 weeks of bombardier school and then 6 weeks of navigation school. And I was commissioned December 4th, 1943 as a second lieutenant.
Before heading to Europe, Goldsticker was able to train with his 10-member B-17 bomber crew. 4 months later, Goldsticker would fly to pick up a brand new B-17, which he and the other men would fly to Europe and land in Iceland.
In about 4 months, we flew around Florida, perfecting my bombing skills, the navigation skills, the piloting skills. So now we'll get together as a crew and working the 10 of us together. And it was valuable. You had to know. We were sent to Savannah, Georgia, and picked up a shiny new B-17 and told to take it to England. So we flew from Savannah to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and our co-pilot lived in Far Rockaway, New York, and he called his father and said he'd be by in the morning. We were right down the main street of Far Rockaway, about 100 feet above the rooftops. Well, that's a no-no, but we're going overseas anyway. They couldn't do anything to us. Then we went to Peacefield in New Hampshire and then Labrador. And we got hung up in Labrador because our co-pilot had cold for 2 days, so we couldn't leave. From there, we had an overnight flight to Iceland.
Goldsticker points out that Iceland then was not the tourist location that it is today.
Now Iceland's a tourist destination. All I remember, they had outhouses and snowy and windy, and you literally freeze your ass in the outhouse when you went. It's my recollection of Iceland. Then from Iceland, we went into Ireland and Scotland and then into England.
After getting to Europe, Goldsticker and the rest of the B-17 bomber crew were able to get their bearings for a few weeks before their first mission on May 27, 1944.
Got to England, and we were assigned to the 452nd Bomb Group. They had lost 14 out of 24 planes on the 12th of May over Brux, Czechoslovakia. So we went in as a replacement for those crews that were lost. And we figured I had 25 missions, and you lose 50% in one day. What chances you have? But we flew down about England a couple of weeks getting acquainted. And then on May 27th, we did fly our first mission to St. Valery, France. We bombed a heavy gun emplacement there. The group had gone off earlier, and they sent just a squadron of 6 of us to bomb this heavy gun emplacement. It was about like 70, 80 miles from Normandy, getting ready for the invasion.
Much more from Ralph Goldsticker when we come back. I'm Greg Columbus, and you're listening to Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus. Our guest in this edition is Ralph Goldsticker, Jr., a U.S. Army Air Force veteran from the European theater of World War II. Every member of a bomber crew had a very important job, and Bombardier was no different. Ralph Goldsticker explains the responsibilities he had aboard the B-17.
As a bombardier, the bombs are not armed when you put aboard. They're put fuses in right at put them on the plane. They hoist them up and put them in. And in the fuse, there's a cotter pin holding a vane in. And the vane will come loose and hit the detonator. So the detonator hits explosive. It's my job as a bombardier to take the cotter pin out of the bomb so the vane can spin loose in the air and the detonator is free then to hit the bomb. And I do that generally when we're over the channel before we got to 10,000 feet where we'd go on oxygen. But, and to make sure the bombs are secure too. But the way we were dressed, you couldn't move around very much. So, well, the temperature was anywhere from 25 to 40 below zero. And we were dressed, and I had 2 pair of pants on and a heavy jacket. And we had heated suits also, electrical heated suits. And I also wore a pair of silk gloves under my gunner's gloves so my hands wouldn't stick to the bomb site going down the bomb run. And we also had a hose to the oxygen, a hose to the electrical suit, a hose to our mic. We had our Mae West on, we had our flak suit on, we had a metal helmet on. Literally, you could hardly move around. So that's why before I went oxygen, pulled the pins from the bombs. But no, it was horrible atmosphere. We weren't pressurized. So it was just bad. I did carry a 45 and binoculars with that also hanging around my neck. The 45s destroyed the bomb site in case we crash landed.
Interestingly, one of the biggest dangers to Goldsticker's B-17 was other American planes. Goldsticker describes the perils of taking off into very crowded skies.
The scariest part of any mission was takeoff, with these 18 planes taking off from our, another 18 from a nearby airfield. As I said, there were 28 bomber bases, and going through the clouds with, I hope you didn't collide. They did happen occasionally, but I still don't know how we did it. We formed in groups of 18. Our group may be firing a green flare, another group a yellow, another blue, and you know who to form on. And if you couldn't form on your own leader, you'd go with some other group. But it's amazing how you put 1,000 people, planes in the air, and get them all going. I'm amazed. But that was the second scariest part.
Finally, it was time to do the job they trained to do: conduct dangerous flights to attack the Nazis and their assets. Goldsticker describes his first and second missions.
Well, the first mission was just nothing to it. We're with enemy coast maybe 10 minutes, and that was it. So I said, well, that's one under my belt. Well, let me backtrack a second. The first night in the Quonset hut, there were 10 of us living in a Quonset hut, 2 air crews, the 4 officers and 2 crews, and we had a weatherman and a medic there. And the first night in there, I'm in my bunk, and there 3 live 45 rounds were shot. The other crew, flowing 22 missions, no one had ever finished 25 in our group, and they were just flak happy. And they had 3s just shooting how close I could come to you. I turned my back. I hoped I survived the first night, and well, I did, as you can see. But no, the first mission was fine. But 2 days later, on May 29th, we flew to Leipzig, Germany. That's about as far as you can get in Germany, and about a 9.5 hour flight. And we lost 3 out of 18 planes that day. So again, you're wondering, if you're losing a 6th in one day, how are you going to survive 25? And then they did raise it to 30 right before D-Day and 35 after D-Day, when the Luftwaffe wasn't quite the problem.
When we come back, Ralph Goldsticker will describe what combat was like aboard the B-17. I'm Greg Corombos, and this is Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Our guest in this edition is Ralph Goldsticker Jr., a U.S. Army Air Force veteran of the European theater in World War II. Goldsticker's B-17 bomber played a role on D-Day, and he got a bird's-eye view of the invasion. Goldsticker describes here what it was like to see the largest amphibious operation in history.
We were called into briefing on the 4th of June, about 10 o'clock, and we were there about 10 minutes, and they sent us back. The invasion was called off. Then we're called back the next day, the 5th of June, about 10 o'clock, and told the invasion was on. And our target was a heavy gun emplacement between Sword Beach and the city of Cannes. We took off about 2 in the morning, and there's so many planes in the sky, we had to fly from England to Scotland to come back to Normandy. There were 3 bomber streams hitting the beaches, 1,000 or 1,200 planes. And I said our target was Argentine. We took off at 2, and I said I dropped my bombs at 6:58. And it was kind of cloudy that day. You couldn't see much, and we landed about 9:30 that morning. And then they gave us lunch or breakfast, whatever we had, and reloaded the planes, and we took off about 2 o'clock again. And our target this time was Argentine. It's a railroad junction about 30 miles south of the beaches to prevent the Germans bringing their troops and supplies forward. And that day, I could see the harbor, and you could see these 6,000 or 7,000 naval vessels in there. Battleships, cruisers, landing craft. I think everything but canoes. And it was about 50 miles from Sword Beach to Omaha Beach, so that's a big, big harbor. And flying back to England, every road, every highway, every street was loaded with tanks, jeeps, ambulances, you name it, ready to go ashore. And by the end of D-Day, I understand 150,000 Allied troops had landed. It was a long day. I was in the air 14 and a half hours, but we had a easy kind compared to those on the ground, though.
Despite the success of the beach invasion, there was no rest for the weary, and Goldsticker was called back into action after only one day of rest.
We didn't fly the next day, but the following day, the 8th of June, was a different type of mission. We're going to bomb the bridges or Tours. The Loire River cuts France right in half, and this is going to keep the Germans bringing more supplies forward. But that mission, we had two 1,600-pound armor-piercing bombs, one under each wing, and they're already armed. And we had 4 inside, and it's 9,600 pounds, the most we'd ever carried. And we're worried we were going to take off, especially with 2 armed bombs aboard. But we made it and took the bridge down like we're supposed to.
After bombing the bridges at Tours, Goldsticker's service in World War II took an interesting turn. He told us about a mission in Russian territory in support of the Russian Red Army. Things did not quite go as planned, and Goldsticker got swept up in a whirlwind tour across Russia and the Middle East in a story you won't soon forget.
We went into briefing in the morning, and they showed the target. Here it is, from here to Berlin, actually Rulin, and all the way into Russia, down to Poltava, Russia. That's between Kiev and Kharkov and the Ukraine. Well, the idea was going to be triangle bombing. We were going to go from Poltava into Italy, bombing on the Eastern Front, help the Russians, and go back on the Western Front. This was 2 weeks after D-Day. It was June 21st. Well, we bombed Rulin, an oil refinery, on the way, and after 11 and a half hours, we landed in Poltava. And we had 3 airfields, American airfields there, Poltava, Mirgorod, and Piron. But we were tented on the edge of the airfield. And about midnight, the Germans dropped a flare over the field, just like daylight, and proceeded the next hour to bomb the airfield. When we landed 48 B-17, wingtip to wingtip, all in a row. I don't know whether space or trying to impress the Russians, but the bombing went on for an hour. I just ran away and found a Russian family, a slit trench, and went in with them. But in the morning, we woke up. Our airplanes, 47 out of 48 B-17s were all destroyed. They were just engines and tails. Fortunately, I'd taken my escape kit out, our escape head. We always had French, Belgium, and Dutch money, and they gave us money also, 50 American dollars at the time also. But this is, and also in the escape kit, they have a map of the area where you might jot down in case you want to escape, a silk map. So I'd taken that out of my plane. So next day I went up to Mirgorod. They'd been cloud covered, so they did not get bombed, and helped them load their bombs. Remember, it was the roughest ride I ever had. It was 60 kilometers on a corduroy road, and the Army truck is bounce. But anyway, after a week, the Air Transport Command sent in C-47s for us. And we came out, first stop was Rostov, a Russian airfield. Remember that they entertained us that night. We sang to them. I had a shooting contest with my .45. Well, I couldn't hit anything. They did much better. But I remember dinner, water glass full of vodka. Morning for breakfast, another glass full of vodka. And then when we went from there, we were supposed to go to Tehran. Well, it was in Sakhtyan, because Tehran's up in the mountains, so we went into another Russian town, never seen any American. And I remember about that, they had the straw mattress about a quarter-inch thick over sawed-off logs. My knees kept going through all night long. I got off and slept on the floor, and the captain said, "You can't do that. You're insulting them." So I got back in bed. And the next day we went into Tehran. And I remember going in. We were on the edge of, up in the mountains on the edge of Tehran. And we walked in town, and next night, with our $50 American, first bar we found, we blew our American dollars and half crocked on. I remember on the way back, we went swimming in the reservoir. And the thing that I still remember, there's water coming from the mountains down the gutter. And here is a cow getting whatever, drinking there. 50 yards down, people getting water for their house, take it in. We were that far, the edge of Tehran. It was a metropolitan city, but we were on the side. And next day we flew. I remember stopping in Iran, and our orders were our pink slacks, which is wool uniforms. Here we are in July in Iran, and it's hot. Then we went into Cairo for the night, spent the night in Cairo. The next night we're in Tripoli, and then finally we went to Casablanca. And here we were still in our wool uniforms. But in Casablanca, we're supposed to catch the plane the next day back to England. Well, we met some naval aviators that night, and we're having a good time. So we didn't show up the next day, or the next. And they said, "You get on that plane or else you're going to be court-martialed." Well, we did. But we're in Casablanca. We tried to spend our French money and then call the MPs on us. We had occupied French money. Casablanca was free French. But on that trip alone, I spent dollars and pounds and francs and rubles and piastros and lira.
After getting back to England, Goldsticker took to the skies again, this time to bomb Munich, one of the most important cities of the Nazi war production.
July 31st, 1944, we're 27,000 feet over Munich. And about 10 seconds after I dropped the bombs, a burst of flak hit right under us, knocked out 2 engines, one on each side. And a piece of flak came through the bottom of the plane. The pilots had on armor seats, maybe a quarter-inch thick, went through there, went through the co-pilot's left thigh way up here, left hole about the size of a baseball, and out the roof. Well, I was the medical officer of the group, so I went up and gave him a shot of morphine. It was still in flak, so I could leave my guns, and gave him a shot of morphine, sprinkled salt on his wounds. And on 2 engines, you can't keep up with the formation, and you're sitting duck. And we were attacked by fighters, so I had to go back to my guns again. But a squadron of P-51s came and drove them off. But the only thing that saved them was 40 degrees below zero. The blood froze as it came out. So while I was back my guns, he was not bleeding. We tried to go in Switzerland. It was just 70 miles away from Munich, and it was fogged in, so we could not. So we threw everything overboard that we could. For the last 3.5 hours, I gave him another shot of morphine and then kept pressure on his wound with the gauze and bandage, trying to keep the bleeding from being too much. When I got back to briefing or debriefing, they asked me if I was injured. And I said, "I don't know. I had blood all over me." Until I took a shower, I found out I was okay. I know my parachute was cut to ribbons with the black. I wrote that home to my mother, but I said, I didn't have it on. I didn't. Our parachutes by the side of us.
To get to the number of missions necessary to go home, Ralph Goldsticker had to fly one last mission.
I flew that mission as a navigator, went to Mainz, Germany. We're buying a railroad yard. This is October 9th, 1944. And, of course, I was more apprehensive. This is the end. Am I going to make it or not? And I remember I wrote back home that crossing the channel, we were firing the guns, just using up the ammunition. The bombardier and I were just firing away. And I wrote home that night that maybe tonight I'll get a good night's sleep knowing I won't be shot tomorrow.
Looking back on his service, Goldsticker shared an interesting perspective on duty and pride.
I'm proud of we. 16 million of us were in service, and we all did our job, and it was all important. The guy typing up the stuff in the office, and one filling up the plane with gas or the bombs, everybody, or the cooks and bakers who kept us going. We all had our job to do, and we did it. There's nothing special. Mine might have been more dangerous, but everybody's important.
Ralph Goldsticker Jr., a U.S. Army Air Force veteran in the European theater of World War II. I'm Greg Corumbus, and this is Veterans Chronicles. Hi, this is Greg Corumbus, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit AmericanVeteransCenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features. And of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.